here. This was Mitt Romney's house in Massachusetts. Nice, right? A $3 million estate in a really lovely town just outside of Boston called Belmont, Massachusetts. In April 2009, Mitt Romney sold this estate in Belmont with the pool you can see there and the tennis courts. This, I think, is one of Mitt Romney's son's houses. This is just around the corner from the old Mitt Romney estate in the same town in Belmont. After selling his $3 million home in Belmont, Massachusetts, Mitt Romney and his wife, who are multimillionaires, obviously, they say that they moved into a basement apartment in this house, in their son's house. This house, again, just around the corner from their old house that they sold. The basement of the son's house was Mitt Romney's official residence in Massachusetts. That, for example, was the official address he gave for the purposes of voting. Now, the rules of Massachusetts residency when it comes to voting purposes are pretty clear. Your place of residency for voting must be where you dwell. It must be where you live, and it must also be the center of your domestic, social, and civil life. Nice. Was Mitt Romney's son's basement where he dwells? Was it the center of his domestic, social, and civil life? I have no idea. What do I know? What do you know? What does anybody know about Mitt Romney's domestic life and where its center is? Who knows? But that was the claim that Mr. Romney was making when he proclaimed that to be his official address. He told the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that his son's basement was where he dwelled. At the same time, Mr. Romney purported to dwell in his son's basement, though at the same time he claimed that his son's basement was the center of his domestic, social, and civil life. Mitt Romney also owned this house in California, a $12.5 million beachfront abode just outside San Diego in the coastal town of La Jolla. The Romneys also owned this $10 million, what they call cabin, up in New Hampshire, scenically located on the shores of beautiful Lake Winnipesaukee. So Mitt Romney has a $12 million house in California. He has a $10 million house in New Hampshire, but come election time, he says he lives in his son's basement in Massachusetts, which would mean that he would be a Massachusetts resident. It would imply that the center of his life is the basement of his son's house. As hard as that may be to believe, and here's where the problem comes in, Mitt Romney went on voting in Massachusetts as if he still lived there. He reportedly voted in the Republican primary for the late Ted Kennedy's Senate seat, a primary won by Republican Scott Brown. And then he mailed in a ballot in the general election race that made Scott Brown a senator from Massachusetts, all apparently while living in his son's basement, even though he had multi-million-dollar homes in both California and New Hampshire at the time. Does that sound feasible? Now that these questions are being raised about Mitt Romney as he runs for president, I frankly expect that his campaign is going to handle this very well. They're going to come up with a very easy-to-remember, explanatory story that makes this all go away. I'm guessing that's what they'll do. Mr. Romney has the same campaign spokesman now that he had the last time this sort of controversy swirled around him. That was when he was running for governor of Massachusetts in 2002. The Massachusetts residency requirements for voting are, again, sort of poetic. Your voting address must be where you dwell, and it must be the center of your domestic, social, and civil life. That's for voting. But the residency requirements, if you want to run for governor in Massachusetts, those requirements are different. Those requirements are that you must have lived in the state for 7 consecutive years before running. Mitt Romney ran for governor of Massachusetts in 2002. From 1999 to 2001, he lived in Utah. His house in Park City, Utah was taxed as his primary residence. He lived in Utah. He paid $54,000 less in property taxes than he would have paid had he been a resident someplace else, say Massachusetts, if he was just staying in Utah for a while. I was living in Massachusetts at the time he was running for governor, and I remember that campaign. I remember how angry people were about the idea that this guy from Utah was going to be the next Massachusetts governor. It was a real controversy, at least among Democrats that I heard talking about it. It seemed at the time like it was going to affect his chances of becoming governor. But Mr. Romney's campaign handled it really deftly. They paid all of the difference in taxes that he would have paid had he not been a Utah resident. They blamed Utah. They said it was Utah's mistake. They said Mitt Romney never wanted to move his residency. It must have been some clerical error. It took a long time, a lot of finagling. I'm sure it took a lot of legal fees, but they got that issue settled. They made it seem that legally Mitt Romney had lived in the state where he wanted to be governor, even though it really seemed like he lived in Utah. They settled that back in 2002. And my guess is that they will get it settled in this case as well. in response to a complaint filed about whether or not Mitt Romney voted illegally when he voted in the Scott Brown election last year. Massachusetts state officials are trying already to brush this complaint off. Massachusetts election officials telling the conservative website The Daily Caller today, quote, "This was adjudicated before in 2002 when he ran for governor." The same Massachusetts official said that although these new allegations relate to changes of residency after 2002, quote, "The time to bring this up was when he voted." When he voted? Once you vote illegally, you're good? Once you get away with it, no big deal? Sort of a lame response from Massachusetts state officials on this so far. But I think it does show the disinclination that people may have, even in Massachusetts, to go after Mitt Romney on issues like this. One man who does not have that disinclination to go after Mitt Romney on an issue like this, or any other for that matter, is the source of this Massachusetts voter fraud complaint that was filed yesterday. His name is Fred Karger. He is not only raising these questions about Mitt Romney, he says he has been investigating this issue about Mitt Romney in person as well. Mr. Karger interviewed residents of Belmont, he says, and he says they told him they have not seen Mr. Romney in years. Mr. Karger says he even asked Mr. Romney's wife about the couple's living arrangements earlier this year. He claims she told him they were living in California. We contacted the Romney campaign tonight to ask them some questions about these allegations. They did not respond to our request for comment.